Hey there, my name is Shane Craddock, and this is the Inner Edge podcast, where I share a different take on how to lead and live a sustainable high-performance life. Over the course of different episodes, I'm going to challenge the belief that tension, stress, and struggle are essential to success and creativity. My experience is that there's an easier way, there's a better way, and indeed there's an essential way that we need to explore for the times that we live in. So let's go ahead, let's jump in and explore. Hi there, welcome to today's episode, which is going to be a little bit different to the normal ones if you've been following me on this podcast journey. This is episode 238, which when I started, was it almost 3 years ago, I wouldn't have thought that was probably possible, but there you go. Over the last couple of weeks, it occurred to me, I was being interviewed actually for a different podcast, and afterwards I'd been asked some really good questions, had a great conversation with the podcast host. But afterwards, it occurred to me, wow, you know what, Shane? It's 30 years since you went on this journey. And the reason for that journey was a breakdown, a severe breakdown. But it was actually 30 years ago in July 1995 when I found myself in a very dangerous situation where I was mentally, had gone so dark that I had got to a position where I'd made a plan to basically leave planet Earth. And it's easier for me to talk about that now, even though sometimes when you talk about something like this, you have to be careful because you can drag up memories of the past. But I've gotten so used to it. In a way, I kind of almost visualize it like somebody else. Having said that, I kind of stopped and I said, do you know what, 30 years goes by like a blink of an eye. If you're my vintage, you'll know what I mean. And I just thought, maybe I'll ask myself some questions and I'll interview myself in a way, just for my own benefit. And I thought then I did that, and then I got some nice insights, and I thought I'd share them with you if you're interested. So today it's a little bit different to the normal podcast, and maybe you might get some insights, some reflection, hopefully some inspiration, because I think some of the stuff I'm going to talk about today, I think is universal. I mean, I've got my own journey, you got your own journey, you got your own life, but yet there are universalities within all of our lives. So just in case you're thinking of this as a downer of an episode, it's not. It's not. This episode isn't about pain as such. It's about what the pain opened up, because I feel very grateful for the life that I have, that I'm in, and I'm very grateful for what I've learned. And so much of what I've learned has come from severe pain, and particularly the pain that started 30 years ago, where, as I said, I got myself in a very dark place, and I was very fortunate to get out of it. Yes, I had to activate courage within myself to get out of it, but I learned so much. So I have 5 questions that I asked myself, which I'm going to share with you. The first question I asked myself was, what did your breakdown really teach you? And I think the first thing that I realized was that I had a mind, which I never realized before. And then I was curious, well, what is a mind? But then what I realized very quickly was, and this is where things started to change, was that I realized I didn't have to believe everything that my mind was telling me, as in my thinking about myself and my life. So I realized that I had a choice of, hold on a second here. What if that isn't true? And I'd never considered that before. And I started to tune into how busy my mind was, and also the fact that I had this inner narrator, this inner voice. And at times it might be good, but at that time it was pretty toxic. It was very cynical. It was judgmental of myself. It was afraid, even though that took a little bit of time to admit to myself. But if I look back on my life and that breakdown, that was the start of a journey that I'm still on. And I realized that there was this inner world that nobody ever told me about, that I didn't know anything about. So I kind of put on my virtual backpack and said, let's go in here and explore. And at the start, it was very clunky, but then I started to get a feel for the world. And I couldn't have predicted then, because at the time when I was in the middle of that breakdown, I was working in a corporate environment with a multinational. I had a good job, but I didn't really own my life, actually, looking back. But the start of that change and the start of getting ownership of my life was to realize that I had a mind. I wasn't my mind. and I didn't need to believe everything it said. And so the mind's agent is the inner narrator, and the inner narrator essentially is speaking out loud your thinking. And if we're not careful, like that thinking we think is reality, but it usually isn't. So that was an important, massively important insight for me. The second question in this interview with myself is, if you could speak to the version of yourself on the brink of that breakdown, what would you say in one sentence? One sentence. Right. So what I would say is, okay, Shane, don't be afraid of life. Embrace it, experience it. It'll bring out your own resilience. Mightn't be exactly one sentence, but they're short statements. And I think, let's see, can we get it into one sentence, Shane? I would say, don't be afraid of your experience. Because I think my mind was scaring the bejesus out of me with everything it was telling me. It was telling me that I was a loser, that my life was going nowhere, that I couldn't get a solution to the problems that I could see. But really, it was all just an excuse to stop experiencing and engaging with life and just going through even stuff that your mind doesn't like, and just get into it, experience it. And then that last bit I said earlier on is, there's no doubt about it. By experiencing and engaging with circumstances and reality, I never realized that that would bring out my resilience. That I realized that actually by the solution to creating resilience isn't learning resilience, it's just engaging with life fully. And that's something that, for me personally, is priceless and has proven to be priceless. So let's move on to question 3. What are the most surprising things that became possible in your life because of the breakdown? Okay, well, I mentioned earlier on about you're not your mind, that I realized I had a mind, but I had this kind of paradigm shift over, oh my God, the world is experienced from the inner to the outer, not the other way around. Yet I was experiencing at the time from the outer to the inner. So whatever my mind was telling me what my life was, what my potential was, based on how it was thinking, but actually that was disabling my potential. And so I realized, oh, I need to take a little bit more responsibility in here and ownership for my inner world, and that will make a difference. And I suppose it kind of went a little bit further in terms of what's the most surprising thing that became possible. I think that the realization that my inner world shapes everything. It shapes my career, my business, my income, my physical ability, my physical health, my relationships, my creativity, my ability to solve, my ability to communicate, my ability to collaborate. It shapes everything. There's literally nothing of value that it doesn't shape. And even today, it's not that I'm a human, so I have problems, I have challenges, I have moments, I get caught out still with my mind. But I know that my inner world shapes everything. And that was a massive realization that kind of got deeper over time. And I think that's one of the things maybe that is surprising as well is, it's the depth to your mind. Most people will go, I think, oh, yeah, I have a mind. I'm not my mind. I'm not my thinking. But the surprise inside of that is that there's a depth to how you really understand that. And the deeper you understand it, the more things change for you in a good way. Question 4 in this personal interview is, what do most people misunderstand about success, happiness, or mental resilience that my 30-year journey has made unmistakably clear? I think there's probably a lot here, but maybe with the time that we're living in right now in 2025, where I suppose there's so much disruption and AI is the main topic of conversation globally for business and for society. And I heard the CEO and founder of OpenAI, Sam Altman, talking about the two skills for the future, adaptability and resilience. And I think maybe in that context, I will say that I don't think you need to build resilience. As I said earlier on, I think you uncover it, you tap into it. I think we all have incredible reserves of resilience. So it's like having this great deposit of oil or gold deep underground. It's a question of how do I uncover that? How do I tap into that? And usually the thing that's in the way, in my experience, is your mind, your thinking, and a lack of understanding of the role the mind plays, the role thinking plays. And usually the mind will stop you engaging with life, stop you experiencing it. But if you can get around that, which I think is totally easy and possible, then you start to untap your resilience. So it doesn't, none of us want to go through pain and suffering, through difficult circumstances, but sometimes that's what life lands on your door. Very often that's what makes you grow. And what I like though is that the same thing links to your happiness and achievement, that you have this kind of untapped reservoir of happiness, you have an untapped reservoir of potential and creativity, and it's all the same thing in terms of once you engage and go and have the courage to move, life seems to give you a key to get into this treasure chest, this innate potential. It doesn't mean that there's not pain. It doesn't mean that there's not suffering. This doesn't mean there's not challenge. But I guess that's part of the hero's journey. And that's what you are. I guess that's how I would see it. Question number 5, what's one practice, belief, or shift that has served you consistently across all 30 years and still matters today? It's never easy to read 30 years, actually. That just seems, what? I still think I'm 25, not whatever. Anyway, so this is an interesting one. What's one practice, belief, or shift that served you consistently? Look, I guess from my point of view, I've realized that I used to think that habits were everything. And I would have been very diligent in habits. And I realized, okay, well, that actually is not true. And what's really, really, really important is to, I guess, pay attention and give time to understanding your inner world. And I think for me right now, the thing that I would say that maybe it's an insight is I'm not my mind. I am the awareness that sees my mind, that sees the mind. So that's one for sure. But linked to that, I would say that I'm aware with the mind, that when people talk about the mind, they usually refer to the personal thinking mind, the part that has all the data about their memories, their lives, their knowledge, their experiences. That's all there. But there's something deeper then. If you go beyond that personal thinking mind, there's, I don't know, maybe you might call it even divine mind, universal mind, intuitive mind, something that is deeper. And that seems to have its own intelligence that I'm fascinated with. And it comes in more into my life. And I've seen it with clients where it comes in where you're in the flow. And I see flow as something that is innate as well. Something that's natural, not something you have to overly strive for. Flow is a natural state that comes in. And that's probably one of my biggest fascinations right now, is that from what I can see, flow is entirely available to everybody, regardless of your circumstances, regardless of what you think your background is, regardless of what you think your limitations are, because ultimately that's coming from your mind. And once I can kind of detach the clutches of my mind, I kind of, seems to me that what happens is you kind of move back into the flow. You don't kind of have to reach for it. Now, I know that a lot of this might seem strange, perhaps, or abstract, but for me, kind of that, seeing that inner door back 30 years ago, I suppose when I was in my first counseling session with a guy called Morris, which I've spoken about in other podcasts, and when he said to me, you realize you have a mind, and I remember thinking, it's only after, I suppose the way I communicate it now is, it was almost like he shone a light on a part of room of the back of my mind that was in darkness, and there was a door there that said inner world, and I opened that door, looked inside and went, oh my God, nobody ever told me about this place. And it was like massive inside once I pushed open that door, like a completely different world. And that was the door to everything, for change. But going back to the question, what still serves me today, I regularly during my day will go, hang on, that's my mind, that's my thinking. I'm not my mind. I'm the awareness that sees the mind. That's what I call the inner CEO, the part that's aware, but also the thinker. I am the one that thinks. I can shape my thinking. And it's a bit like, I think, maybe realizing that you're the sky. You're not the storm in the sky. You ultimately, that storm will pass. Storms happen to me still internally, but I am the sky. Now, as you're listening to me, I don't know what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and you may not be, hopefully you're not facing a breakdown like I was 30 years ago, but you might be stuck in a breakthrough waiting to happen, or you might be trying to figure something big out, or you might be feeling the struggle because you're human. Welcome to the club. But hopefully, if nothing else, listening to me rattle on about those questions, reflecting on the last 30 years, might give you some insight for yourself. But let me ask you 3 specific questions for you, if you're still with me. 1, okay, think about your greatest struggle. I share with you mine. What has been your greatest struggle, and what has it tried to teach you? Because, what if life is this incredibly intelligent workshop that is trying to help you grow into the best version of yourself? So take that lens and say, okay, well, hang on. What has my greatest struggle tried to teach me? That's question 1. Second question for you is, what might be possible if you didn't believe everything that your mind is telling you right now? Like, what if you went around it and said, hang on a second here, what if I don't have to listen to it? That's a good experiment. And a third question, to turn it all maybe into action, is who would you be and what would you do today if you weren't afraid? Even to take 1 step, what would you do if you weren't afraid, if you had more courage? Because very often it's the inner voice that stops us taking that step. So to close out, I think, I don't know, what do we close out with today, Shane? I guess maybe your mind isn't the enemy, but believing it blindly is the enemy. And I think your potential lies outside your personal mind. And maybe the other thing I'll close out with is, with the challenges and struggles. And if you're somebody listening to this podcast, but you're obviously somebody who's interested in achievement and fulfillment. But what I'll close out with is, very often the gift is in the pain. And something that did occur to me as a valuable thing is that pain in life and in business is inevitable, but suffering is optional. But the pain is usually a signal that there's a gift somewhere in there for you. It's funny, I had finished the episode and I was starting to put it into the production line to complete it in terms of the audio frequencies and all that kind of stuff you have to do. And then it occurred to me, actually, there's a couple of things that I should add in that are very practical, because I'm aware that some of the answers I'm giving might be a little bit abstract, even though they're meaningful to me, and I'm hoping they mean something to you. But something occurred to me, a couple of things did. One is something that I still do today that I learned from, I suppose, that difficult time 30 years ago was, and to be fair, it was the Councillor Morris who had told me to do this every day. He said, look, go for a walk, and a walk where you quiet your mind. And I remember saying, how do I quiet my mind? And his advice, which was very straightforward, was like, look, just pay attention to your senses. So what you see, what you hear, what you feel, the taste, the smells. And that has really shaped a lot on a very simple level of even how I work during my day. So not only do I do that every day, like without it being what I would call a strict habit, I do it multiple times during the day. And if you know me, if you worked with me, you'll probably almost see the thread of that coming into different things, whether it's shifts or taking a mental pit stop. A lot of that originated there. And what I love about it is that it's free, and that it's wired into us as people. And in a world where our minds are getting busier and busier, I think it's really important to take time every day to quiet your mind. And that is something that I think has been invaluable to me. So for what it's worth, that's something I wanted to add in. Another thing that I thought is worth sharing is that, as a white man growing up in Ireland, when I say we, I'm speaking for the collective we, I guess, but you would have been encouraged to be a man and don't show weakness, or maybe don't show vulnerability. And what I realized was that while there's some truth in that in terms of being overly precious, actually it's also dangerous, because what I learned was that it's very important to be vulnerable. It's very important to share problems if they were becoming a burden. And what I realized during that time, which I see people not realizing now, is, there's incredible help available for us when we get stuck mentally. And there's no reason to suffer in silence anymore. And that is an important point, is that everybody, the best of the best, will get caught out at some point. It mightn't be their work, but maybe it's their personal life. Or maybe it's not their personal life, maybe it's their work. But something will happen somewhere where you will feel a lot of pain and maybe might end up suffering. You'll have challenges and it'll seem like there's no way out. And I think there's always a way out, good and bad, maybe perhaps, but the good way is to seek support, seek help. And one thing I have realized over the 30 years is the incredible generosity of the human spirit. Not just with professionals trying to help you, but just friends, family, even strangers. There's an incredible generosity in the human spirit, which very often you don't see until there's a crisis. And then you see it, though. There's a universality in it. If there's a tragedy at a national level, people come together. If there's a tragedy in the community, people come together. It is amazing if you're there suffering and in pain and you ask for help from people. The majority of people, in my experience, will give that help. And I think that's a great comfort. And then the third one, because these things come in threes, I guess, that I'm going to leave with you today, and I could give you lots more, but I think I'm hopefully giving something that's meaningful and of value to you, is that you have an ability to shape your life, no matter what your mind says, no matter what that inner voice says. And that is very exciting to me, because that is true. Is it easy? No, it can be quite difficult, but it's totally possible. And I think to live in that state of possibility, to realize, actually, I can shape my life. I can shape what's in it. I can shape my experience of it. I am the inner CEO. I can shape things here. So if you're thinking the opposite, I'm going to say, challenge that thinking, because the realm of possibility is, I think we're only scratching the surface as people, as humans. And that gives me a lot of hope and excitement for the future, regardless of people's concerns about changes in technology, which has always been there. We are shapers of the future. And the tool of that shaping is not just the mind, but it's also the human spirit, which can't be copied by a computer. That's it for this week. Ciao for now.